Salvage, a story by user Rantarian. Chapter 57, Turnabout, Part 2. Touchdown was made. Asket was glad to find that the exterior of the hull had plenty of handholds that allowed them to move around, because after the ridiculous ride on the explosive weapon, he'd been very happy to get the chance to dismount it. He had even persuaded Adrian to take the rest of the distance on foot, or at least by grip, since it wasn't far. He had insisted on bringing the missile along, however, and even went as far as using the tether as a sort of leash. "I'll call him Bam Bam," he joked as he'd slipped the cord around it. "Are you intending to take that inside with us?" Asket asked him, already knowing what the answer would be. For some reason, he'd been compelled to ask anyway, as though maybe doing so would result in some outcome other than the inevitable. "Of course," Adrian replied, as though it were self-evident. "It might be useful." "It explodes," Asket reminded him. Adrian turned to flash a grin at him. "And that's why it might be useful." Asket hadn't persisted any further. There wasn't any point, and he felt dispirited enough already. He was beginning to suspect that, even by human standards, Adrian was on the unusual end of the scale, at least compared to Jennifer Delaney. Margarita had been pretty strange by comparison as well, come to think of it. He was disturbed by the possibility that, on Earth, Jennifer Delaney was actually the unusual one. "Here we are," Adrian called out, disturbing his reverie. Asket watched as the human repeatedly tried to activate the lock and failed, growing increasingly irate with each rejection. Asket wasn't sure why Adrian thought that a ship would allow just anyone to open the airlock from the outside, and for the time being he wasn't interested. "Do you still have the jack point?" he asked after the fifth failure. Adrian fished it out of his external zip pocket. "Got it." Asket floated around to the side of the door where the port would be, and held out his hand to receive the small item. Then he pulled the metal slip and revealed the poorly concealed port. He inserted the jack point, and the signal light on his datapad came online. "Bingo?" Adrian asked, seeing the notification. "Bingo," Asket confirmed. No idea of what the word actually meant. "These ports were used for programmers to service the software that runs the door," he explained. "It can't actually open the door directly." "Then what good is it?" Adrian asked. Asket smiled as he completed the process, waved his hand theatrically, then placed it on the security pad. The door opened. "It lets me upload a new version of the software that bypasses the normal security routines," he said as he stepped inside. "Security on these things is usually awful, and this one was no exception." "At least we know the hierarchy buy off the shelf," Adrian commented as he followed, carefully helping Bam Bam into the small chamber. Asket frowned at the warhead that filled most of the room. "Careful with that," he warned. "We'll look stupid if you kill us in here." Asket suspected that they'd look stupid regardless, but there was no reason to help that image along. He closed the door behind them and started work on the next, admittedly slightly disappointed at the exceedingly poor security in place. He promised himself that if he ever designed a starship, its systems would be impregnable to clever people like him. The upload completed, and he reinitialized the software. The door was now theirs for the taking. "All good," he said with a sniff. "Just like me." Adrian took a moment to ready the anti-tank gun, and turned to glance at Asket. "Do you think we can expect a warm welcome?" Asket shrugged. "How warm can it be?" The door opened as Adrian placed his hand on the internal security pad, slowly parting to reveal the presence of a small robotic platform, with a plasma gun mounted on top. It was pointed directly at the airlock, and immediately made the kind of noises required for a mobile gun to start shooting. Adrian hurriedly pressed the security pad again, and the airlock slid closed. "That might be a bit fucking too warm," he contemplated unhappily. "Maybe there's another way in?" "Nowhere that hasn't just been blown up," Asket replied. "Was that a robot with a plasma gun?" "Mobile weapons platform," Adrian confirmed. "I invented it first." "Ah, the ultimate irony of being killed by your own creation," Asket mused. "It's beautifully circular when you think about it." "Fuck off," Adrian retorted with a snort of laughter. "Can we get both doors open at once? I can probably shoot it with this if I'm not trapped inside the easy bake oven." "That's an anti-tank gun," Asket replied, inspecting the weapon unhappily. "That's a robot-y tank," Adrian said with a shrug. "Surely this will—" "It might dent it," admitted Asket, "but the name of that weapon comes from the old days, when everything was made out of sheet plastic." Adrian looked at the gun with disappointment.
So it doesn't do anything special against machines?
Not unless you count failing spectacularly.
Fan-fucking-tastic,
Adrian cursed.
Well, what else can we try?
Well, I'm no engineer, Askett said, but I've heard nasty stories about what happens when power conduits overload, and I saw several in that room. Adrian stared at Askett in open surprise, and gave him an appreciative pat on his helmet as he broke into a broad grin.
Oh, that's fucking genius is what it is. Now, tell me what you need to do.
The complete and utter ruination of the Ellenae's starboard side had been somewhat off-script. 13 reflected as he struggled to regain control of the vessel. It was bad enough to have to deal with the extensive damage that had been caused by his own missiles, but now he needed to coordinate the urgent damage control process, along with deploying countermeasures against the invaders. He'd hardly been able to get into full immersion control fast enough to be able to get everything done. And that was the only reason he'd been able to notice that 2 soldiers were riding a missile towards the Ellenae's larboard airlock. He'd immediately assumed it to be the human, and had not been disappointed. Nobody else would be that insane. He couldn't help but consider what would come after this, once he repelled the invasion. The fact that his own weapons had been turned against him was enough of an embarrassment, and the damage it had caused was far too extensive to hide or even to repair outside of a dedicated repair port. Then there was the fact that it had been the human who had done it. 13 had thoroughly derided Zero for his incompetence in bringing down a pair of humans, even with the arsenal at his command. To be so gravely countered by that same human was a fact that would no doubt come back to haunt him, and could only be mitigated by presenting the human's corpse to the assembly. At least there was only one of them, so in theory he should only have it half as bad as Zero, but at the same time he could not afford any kind of failure. 13's victory must now be absolute, and the best way to do that was to employ massively overwhelming force. The ship was crawling with the sentry bots, but now he released the special units into the room beyond the plasma bot. It was unlikely they'd make it past that thing. It had been refined from the designs recovered from the Ruaher weapons designer on Cimbrian, but it was better safe than sorry, and it should at least delay him until he got the damage under control. It was a big assumption, and 13 continued to keep a fraction of his attention on their position. They couldn't stay in that airlock forever.
Well,
Adrian announced.
We can't stay in this airlock forever.
Reprogramming is complete, Askett reported. I maximized the power requirement variable on the door open routine.
And I just removed the circuit breaker,
Adrian replied with a grin, tossing the small part into a corner. It wasn't really the right name for the part. He knew that much, but it served much the same function, and things tended to explode when they weren't in place. Zottersil had proven to be an excellent training ground in how to destroy valuable ship parts. They opened the door to the outside, and Askett clambered out. Adrian didn't want the little Cortai anywhere near what was about to happen, and he didn't take much enjoyment in the fact that he couldn't be a long fucking distance away either. But that was what Bam Bam was for, he thought, and made sure the tether was nice and tight.
Ready?
He asked over the link, his hand poised over the security pad. Ready, Askett reported. I've just got to press a button.
Nice fucking coincidence,
Adrian replied with an evil grin.
Go.
He pushed the button, and the airlock slammed itself open at full force, revealing the plasmabot inside. Adrian, however, was already being pulled out into space on some insane variant of a bungee jump, and he was spinning wildly out of control, and more importantly out of sight, as the small burst of plasma plumed out. Moments later, a much larger burst of plasma plumed from the airlock, a boiling rush of burning air and metal vapor carried out by the explosive decompression. Kinetic generators weren't sturdy things when faced with million-degree heat, and right now they were likely turning into semi-molten slag. They might even have been part of the blast. The power spiked and the running lights failed, and the Hierarchy vessel went dark. They stared around at the situation for a moment in total disbelief. I think we killed it? Askett asked, turning to Adrian for some kind of confirmation.
Fuck,
Adrian drawled out.
We really are good.
Alright guys, that's going to do it for this one today. I do apologize. I did not realize that I hadn't actually finished this one. Someone pointed it out to me in the comments on the last one, and I meant to get this one out yesterday, but things interfered with that particular plan. But yeah, anyway, guys, I just wanted to say thank you so much for being with me here today. If you wouldn't mind giving this a like and subscribing, all the fun things, leaving a comment so that the algorithm picks up my video and goes, here, people, look at this video. Look at the video. If you just look at the video, you might like it. I know it doesn't have anything but a picture, and I'm working on that. I really am. I'm working on it. We're getting it down. I'm trying to sound like Donald Trump now. Anyway, I appreciate you guys being here with me, as always. Your time is valuable to me and to yourselves, I know, and I appreciate you spending a little bit of it here with me. So I will see you guys in the next one. Bye. Oh God, I'm dying. Oh God, why? Why is this happening? Dry throat. Should have gotten some water. Anywho, guys, that was really loud. I'm going to cut that out.